So the first thing you do when you go to your site to do your habitat assessment is to find your bottom of site and find your top of site. Here's an example of an established bottom of site monument here that I use every year. So this overhanging tree is for the in-person students. This is our bottom of site monument. So what we do is we have GPS coordinates to the bottom of site and top of site, because remember, it's important to go to the same bottom of site and top of site every single time. But those GPS coordinates have air associated with them. And so it's not going to be super exact. So in addition to the GPS coordinates, we also have monuments. These are typically trees or really characteristic rocks, something that's pretty permanent, that's going to be there year after year. And we take pictures of these so that future crews can see that this is the bottom of site monument and that they know that the bottom of site starts right by this tree. In non-urbanized area, a lot of times you'll see like a little metal tag or a little plastic tag nailed to the side of the monument. I don't typically do that, and a lot of people opt not to do that in urbanized areas because they get torn off because people think they're garbage anyways. But if you've ever seen them, that's what those mean. And you can see also too, that's a nice example of a point bar, which we were talking about earlier downstream there with a cut bank. And again, you can see the line of bubbles here. That's that thalweg, that line of fastest moving water that's causing that erosional pattern in our stream. So after we've located our bottom of site and also our top of site, the next thing is to look at setting up transects, and also just pointing out that thalweg line right there. So I went ahead and done our second transect as well as the first transect. So the first transect is going to be hanging at our bottom of site monument, and I've labeled it as T1. So that means transect 1. I use forestry flagging. Sometimes people use like little flags that you stick in the bank. It doesn't really matter as long as you have a good method. And you can see there that we have transect 2 flagged up there. So the reason why we have transects is because for a couple different reasons. One is that we need to get a total length of our site, and that's pretty hard to do without having transects. So if we know that each of these 2 transects are 5 meters apart, for example, we can then add up all of those 5-meter transects and get a total site length. The other reason is because a lot of habitat metrics are going to be transect based. So sometimes you take photos at certain transects, sometimes you do certain measurements at odd transects, or 1, 5, 10, and 15, and 20 transects. So it's a good way to like evenly break up your site. Okay, here's my super precarious example of pulling transects. So I am standing at the bottom of site. I have my surveyor's tape, which looks like this, and that depth rod, which I have very precariously wedged into the river, represents my crewmate. So again, I'm standing at the bottom of site. There's a bottom of site monument, and I am stretching the transect 5 meters upstream. Now, a couple things to note here. I'm going straight upstream, and I am also standing in the middle of the wetted channel, so the part of the river that's actually wet, as well as this depth rod representing a person is wedged in the middle of the wetted channel as well. So we're pulling this straight. So we're not accommodating for river bends or any sort of river shape. You're just pulling it straight. And that's how a lot of habitat protocols mark transects. However, some habitat protocols that I've worked with try and follow the thalweg. So again, that thalweg is a really nice example here. You can see that bubble line. If you're following the thalweg when you are pulling transects, it means that when you go around a river bend, you have to bow out the tape measure so that it follows the river bend. I have done this in habitat protocols before, and it's really hard. I mean, you can imagine if there's 2 of you, I usually have like a stick, or like you have your arm and you're like trying to get the tape measure to bend. It doesn't really work out in reality, I think, as well as people want it to work out on paper. So a lot of habitat protocols are moving towards this, where you're stretching the transect straight. Sometimes that might end up being that if there's a really sharp bend in the river, you're like stretching the transect across a riverbank. So if there was like a cut bank right here, that's okay. We would still do that. And again, this is just an easier way without having to accommodate the thalweg, because it's really hard to actually follow the thalweg. So for you guys, since you don't have a surveyor's tape measure, when you guys are pulling transect for your video demos, you can just pace it out. So for most people, one really large pace is going to equal about 1 meter. If you're very short or very tall, yours might be a little bit different. But for you guys, just stand in the middle of the bottom, or the middle of the wetted channel at transect 1, and then just walk 5 big steps forward Wow, this is a lot harder to do. Okay, I'll just take 3 steps. You guys get the idea. So just walk 5 big steps forward, and that's gonna be about 5 meters. And then you wanna add your transect flag or whatever you're using to mark the transect on the side of the river. And you're gonna do that to complete all of your transects. This is an example of a site monument that is not ours. I actually don't know whose it is, but this is really typical of bottom and top of site markers. So we have a piece of rebar that has been pounded into the bank, and it has this little cap on top. So a lot of times people use these to mark the bottom and top of sites because they're just a lot more permanent and more exact than like a natural monument. So they could have used this tree here, but it didn't align apparently with exactly where they were wanting to take the measurement. But you know, it's a mystery. Who knows who that belongs to, but not us. But that's an example of a pretty common bottom and top of site marker. Here's my super precarious example of how to pull transects. So I have a depth rod there, because I'm by myself, but normally this would be a person. Oh, it's gonna fall over. Oh shit.